Welcome, dear listener. This is the Sleepy Historian, and you found your way to another quiet corner of the internet, a place for boring history for sleep. If you're here, it's likely because you're searching for a way to drift off gently. Perhaps you're already tucked into bed, lights low, listening for the rhythm of a calm voice. Perhaps you're hoping for bedtime relaxation and soft storytelling, a kind of soft-spoken history documentary designed not to excite, but to soothe. If this sort of calm bedtime storytelling helps you rest, then feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. And I would love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Leave a comment below if you wish. It's oddly comforting to realize that scattered across the world, others too are lying in quiet rooms, drifting toward the same gentle slumber, carried along by relaxing history to fall asleep to. Tonight, we'll explore a theme both unusual and strangely comforting. Unusual jobs people had in ancient China. This is not the story of emperors and generals, nor the famous tales you might have heard many times before. Instead, we'll wander slowly through the quiet corridors of daily life. We'll linger with the tradespeople, the workers, and the curious professions that once filled the long centuries of dynasties. The aim is not drama. There will be no thundering battles, no cries of alarm. Instead, you'll hear of the rhythm of ordinary lives, of occupations that might seem strange to us today, but which once provided stability, dignity, and sometimes even wonder to the people of ancient China. Our journey will be divided into 4 segments, each with its own character and pace. First, we will immerse ourselves in the daily life of these unusual jobs, imagining their routines, their tools, and their sounds. Second, we will trace the life of a particular individual or event, seeing how a single person's path reveals the broader patterns of society. Third, we will pause with mystery, archaeology, and culture, examining what remains, what was recorded, and what still puzzles us. And finally, we will contrast the lives of the common with those of the elite, seeing how the upper and lower ends of society interacted, overlapped, and sometimes ignored one another. Each part will be delivered with calm pacing, quiet descriptions, and just enough detail to settle the mind. You may listen intently, or you may allow your mind to drift in and out, catching fragments here and there, as sleep gradually overtakes you. So now, allow your body to rest. Let your breathing slow. Let your imagination open like a scroll unrolling across time. Tonight, the past will not rush at you. It will arrive like a gentle tide, lapping softly at the edges of consciousness. Let the history sleep story begin. Imagine yourself stepping softly into the streets of an ancient Chinese town, somewhere along the winding riverbanks of the late Han Dynasty. The world is quieter than a modern one, you know. No clamor of engines, no glow of electric light. Instead, there is the shuffle of straw sandals on packed earth, the creak of bamboo baskets swaying from poles across shoulders, and the soft rhythm of people at work. Always at work, in countless trades both familiar and strange. The daily life of ancient China was an intricate weave of occupations. Some professions, like farming and weaving, remain familiar even now. But among the bustling alleys and narrow marketplaces, you might find work that today feels curious, unusual, even whimsical. One such occupation was the professional mourner. In a society that placed immense importance on honoring ancestors and observing rituals for the dead, there was a need for hired individuals to join funeral processions, wailing and lamenting loudly. It was not seen as false or insincere. Rather, it was a way of amplifying grief, of ensuring the spirits knew they were respected, and that the family showed proper devotion. Imagine the steady, practiced cries, the measured sobs echoing beneath funeral banners, as these workers carried out their task with solemn precision. For them, it was not a performance of personal grief, but a job carried out with care and ritual importance. Walk a little further, and you might encounter a man with a trained bird perched on his wrist. This was the fortune teller who worked with sparrows. He would spread small slips of bamboo inscribed with characters, and the bird, fluttering and pecking, would select one. The chosen slip was then read aloud as the seeker's fortune. Such a profession was half ritual, half spectacle. The clink of bamboo slips, the flutter of wings, and the murmured interpretations offered a rhythm of daily life. One part spiritual, one part entertainment. There were also the tooth pullers. In an age without modern dentistry, toothaches were common, and so in the marketplace you might find a man with metal tools carefully laid out on cloth. His business was not glamorous, but it was necessary. The sound of his trade was not unlike the clink of iron against iron, the murmur of advice, the relief or groans of his clients. Though the process was painful, the service was sought by many, and his role was woven into the fabric of the community. And then there were the night's soil collectors. While today's world hides such labor, in ancient towns it was a visible, vital profession. These workers moved quietly before dawn, carrying buckets, gathering the waste of households. It was dirty, uncelebrated work, but essential for sanitation and, in many cases, for fertilizing the fields. Their footsteps were steady, their lives marked by the rhythm of early rising and discreet departure, blending into the shadows before most others awoke. Still, not all unusual jobs were so practical. Some are deeply tied to artistry and ritual. There were story singers who memorized and recited long ballads, weaving together history, folklore, and moral lessons. Their voices would rise and fall in steady cadence, accompanied by the strum of simple instruments. In quiet evenings, families might gather, listening to stories carried by memory and voice, words stretching across generations. These occupations may seem disparate: mourning, fortune-telling, pulling teeth, carrying waste, or singing stories. But together they formed the subtle heartbeat of daily life. Each role filled a gap, whether practical, spiritual, or cultural, creating a society that was both highly organized and deeply human. Pause here for a moment and picture it. The marketplace with its countless sounds, the shuffle of straw sandals, the chatter of bargaining voices, the flutter of sparrows at a fortune-teller's stall, the soft singing of a ballad drifting through the air. These were not the grand spectacles of emperors and battles, but the enduring rhythm of ordinary lives. And as you imagine these lives, remember that to the people themselves, none of it felt unusual. To them, these jobs were necessary, expected, even honorable in their own way. It is only to us, centuries later, that they appear curious, quaint, or strange. This is the beginning of our immersion into the working world of ancient China, quiet trades that filled the hours of countless forgotten lives. Lives lived steadily, one day at a time, with professions that may feel odd today, but once shaped the rhythm of entire communities. As you continue your quiet walk through the town, the alleys unfold with yet more curious trades. The sun is climbing higher now, glinting softly on tiled rooftops and woven mats laid out for drying. The pace of daily life is measured, steady, neither hurried nor idle. The marketplace reveals further glimpses into the unusual professions that once defined ancient China. One such figure you might notice is the professional letter writer. Not everyone in ancient China had the ability to read or write, yet correspondence was vital for trade, for family ties, and for official matters. Seated cross-legged on a low stool, with brush and inkstone before him, the letter writer would listen carefully as his client dictated. His strokes flowed with practiced elegance, each character carefully balanced, each word chosen with precision. For those who could not themselves form the characters, this man was a bridge to communication, a quiet craftsman of words. The sound of the brush scratching softly across paper was the music of his trade. Nearby, you might hear the clinking of metal and wood, though not from a blacksmith. Instead, it comes from the umbrella mender. In a world where resources were cherished and repair was far more common than replacement, these artisans walked the streets with bundles of bamboo ribs, silk patches, and cord. Their work was practical, almost invisible, but highly valued. Each stitch restored utility, each knot tied meant another season of shelter from sun and rain. His trade, though humble, reflected a culture deeply conscious of preserving what was already at hand. Further along, in a shaded courtyard, you might come across an inkstick maker. The craft was slow, methodical. Pine soot, gathered from careful burning, would be mixed with glue and pressed into molds, then left to dry for long months. These ink sticks were not mere tools, but objects of refinement, carried by scholars and officials, symbols of learning itself. The smell of pine smoke lingered faintly around the workshop, a reminder of the transformation from raw soot to something capable of preserving thoughts for centuries. Then there were the bean-curd sellers, carrying baskets balanced on poles across their shoulders. Each morning, fresh tofu was delivered through the neighborhoods. The sellers called out softly as they passed, their voices almost like a chant, rhythmic and steady, inviting households to step out with bowls. The sound was not unlike the song of a street vendor in any age, a voice carrying through the narrow lanes, marking the daily rhythm as surely as the ringing of a bell. Some trades were even stranger to modern ears. Consider the peddlers of insects and crickets. In ancient China, crickets were prized for their songs, kept in small cages as living music boxes. Some were even used for fighting matches, where their chirping and energy became forms of amusement. The peddlers carried tiny, delicate cages, some made of gourds or bamboo, each with its fragile occupant. Their trade was part entertainment, part tradition, filling evenings with the steady hum of chirping sounds that echoed from courtyards and gardens. And then, at the margins of town, you might glimpse the reed flautist, a wandering musician whose job was not to sing stories, but to provide simple melodies at ceremonies, markets, or tea houses. The tones of his flute floated softly across the air, sometimes joyous, sometimes mournful, always steady. For many, his music was a backdrop, yet accompanied countless daily moments, from weddings to gatherings, from public rituals to private celebrations. There were also the herbalists and medicine sellers who set up small stalls, their tables filled with jars and bundles of dried plants. Their trade straddled the line between knowledge and mystery. Some sold remedies for common ailments, teas for the stomach, powders for headaches, salves for the skin. Others leaned into performance, with bottles and scrolls displayed dramatically, their voices rising in promises of health and vigor. Still, their role was important. In an era before modern medicine, such stalls were sources of both comfort and hope. The scents here were distinct. Bitter roots, dried blossoms, resinous bark, each contributing to the sensory weave of the marketplace. Step back and look around, and you'll notice the rhythm repeating. Each job, whether mending umbrellas, writing letters, selling tofu, or offering herbs, had its own sounds, scents, and movements. Yet together, they created a harmony, a living composition of daily work. These unusual professions may strike us as quaint, but for the people of ancient China, they were steady occupations, woven into life as firmly as threads into silk. Imagine yourself standing in the heart of this ancient town. The air carries the faint smoke of cooking fires, the murmured exchanges of customers and vendors, the fluting notes of music blending with the calls of sellers. All around you, workers carry on their unusual, yet vital tasks. Each one contributes to a society that valued order, harmony, and continuity. To them, it was not unusual, it was simply life. As the afternoon lengthens, shadows begin to stretch across the narrow streets, and with them, the patterns of daily life shift. The marketplace quiets just slightly, but other trades stir to life, some of them unusual, some quietly essential. You might notice a man moving deliberately with a basket of brushes slung across his back. He is the street calligrapher, not the letter writer you saw earlier, who composed correspondence, but one who specialized in public inscriptions, shop signs, ceremonial banners, auspicious phrases painted for festivals. His brushes vary in size, some thick and bold, others fine and delicate. When he works, he spreads out red paper, grinding his inkstick slowly, almost meditatively. Then his strokes flow with grace, leaving behind characters that are at once practical and artistic. In his hands, words are not only communication, but symbols of fortune, longevity, and harmony. Nearby, there's another sound, the hollow thump of bamboo against wood. This belongs to the rat catcher. Cities and towns, then as now, faced infestations, and professional rat catchers were hired to reduce their numbers. Their tools were simple: nets, cages, bits of bait, but their skill lay in patience and knowledge of the animal's habits. At night, they would move quietly through storage areas, granaries, and kitchens, their footsteps soft, their ears trained for rustle and movement. Though his work was rarely celebrated, the rat catcher played a role in protecting the community's food supply, a silent defender against small, persistent threats. Step further along, and you may hear the rhythmic pounding of wood on cloth, the sound of the fuller. His task was to cleanse and thicken woven fabric by beating it in water, mixed with clay or other substances. The result was stronger, cleaner cloth, ready for use in garments or household items. The fuller's trade was laborious, repetitive, and far from glamorous, yet it formed a vital step in the textile cycle. Each steady strike echoed through the alleyways, a background rhythm of industry. Then, in the shaded corner of the town square, a group gathers around a man who performs a different kind of labor. He is a story map painter. With a large scroll spread before him, he illustrates tales, battles, and legends while narrating them aloud. His brush strokes sketch out mountains, rivers, and figures, bringing stories to life visually as well as verbally. For the audience, many of whom could not read, this was both education and entertainment. The colors on the scroll were simple, the figures sometimes exaggerated, but the effect was captivating. This was history told not in books, but in pictures and voice. Even more curious were the paper effigy makers. Their trade appeared most often at funerals, where they crafted delicate paper figures, servants, animals, even houses, that were burned as offerings, meant to accompany the deceased into the afterlife. The effigies were brightly painted, fragile, and fleeting, existing only to be consumed by fire. The smell of burning paper often drifted over from such ceremonies, mingling with incense, creating a sensory memory both somber and beautiful. And if you linger as twilight approaches, you might meet the night watchman. His job was simple yet essential: to walk the streets at regular intervals, carrying a gong or a wooden clapper, sounding it to mark the hours and assure residents of his presence. His calls were steady, almost like a chant, blending with the soft rustle of night breezes. For those lying awake in their homes, the sound was a reassurance that the town was guarded, that time was passing in its steady rhythm. Among all these unusual professions, a theme becomes clear. Each trade, however small, contributed to the greater order of society. The calligrapher painted words of fortune, the rat catcher defended the grain, the fuller strengthened fabric, the effigy maker honored the dead, and the watchman guarded the living. The rhythm of life in ancient China was not defined by the deeds of emperors alone, but by the steady hands of workers whose names are mostly forgotten, yet whose labors shaped daily existence. Pause for a moment and imagine yourself in this twilight scene. The air cools gently, the sounds of the day recede, and new sounds rise. The clapper of the watchman, the quiet mutter of the rat catcher returning home, the whisper of brushes across paper. These are not the grand, thrilling spectacles of history. They are the small, ordinary details of daily life, unremarkable at first glance, yet deeply human and enduring. This concludes our first segment, an immersion in the daily rhythms of unusual jobs in ancient China. As you drift with these images in mind, remember, history is not only the record of rulers and wars. It is also the accumulation of countless lives, countless small labors, each one as real and necessary as the next. And it is often in these small labors that we find the most soothing rhythm of all. In our first segment, we lingered in the marketplaces and alleyways, observing the unusual professions that colored the daily life of ancient China. Now let us shift gently to the life of a single person, a figure who lived and worked within this world. Not an emperor, not a general, but a man whose trade was both unusual and quietly important. His name has not been preserved in history, for he was not a famous figure. Instead, we imagine him through the traces of records and accounts left behind. He was a professional fortune teller, working in the bustling streets of the Tang dynasty capital, Chang'an. The year might have been around the 8th century, when the city was at the height of its glory, a place of markets, temples, palaces, and endless movement. Our fortune teller's life was shaped by rhythm. Each morning, he rose before the city was fully awake. He prepared his small wooden stall, his brushes and slips of bamboo, his caged sparrow trained for the delicate task of selecting fortunes. He set out his seat at a corner near the market, where people of all walks of life passed by: merchants, laborers, monks, and officials. The stall was simple, yet its appeal was great. People came seeking reassurance, guidance, or simply entertainment. Some asked about journeys. Will my travels be safe? Others sought answers about business. Will this trade bring profit? And, of course, there were always questions of love and marriage. The fortune teller would bow his head, let the sparrow flutter across the slips, and then pick up the chosen one to read. His voice was calm, measured, never dramatic. The fortune might be vague, as fortunes often are, but the ritual itself brought comfort. For him, this was not just performance, but livelihood. His income depended on the steady flow of clients, and so he cultivated an air of quiet dignity. He did not shout or call out like other vendors. Instead, he relied on the quiet curiosity that his sparrow provoked. Children often lingered nearby, watching the small bird hop between slips of bamboo. Adults, however skeptical, found themselves drawn to the ritual. In the bustle of a city filled with trade and noise, his stall offered a moment of pause. Yet his life was not without struggle. The authorities sometimes regarded fortune tellers with suspicion. Laws varied across dynasties, and during certain reigns, fortune-telling was restricted, even banned, as officials worried it might spread dissent or undermine order. Our fortune teller lived carefully, never making bold predictions about politics or rulers, keeping his practice to personal matters. His fortunes were crafted to soothe rather than alarm, to encourage rather than provoke. In this way, he managed to navigate the fine line between tolerated profession and forbidden practice. We can imagine him in the evening, after the market grew quiet. He would pack away his slips of bamboo, cover his small cage, and walk home through the winding alleys of Chang'an. His earnings, though modest, were enough to feed his family and maintain his place in the community. Though his trade was unusual, it was accepted and, in its own way, respected. He was part of the intricate web of city life, his presence as constant as the tofu sellers or the letter writers. There is a curious comfort in imagining his days. They were not filled with glory or renown, but with routine. Rising early, preparing his tools, sitting patiently, speaking gently, earning a few coins, and returning home. His life illustrates how unusual jobs were not eccentric novelties, but steady livelihoods that allowed ordinary people to sustain themselves in a vast and complex society. The fortune teller of Chang'an will never be remembered by name. Yet in contemplating his life, we glimpse the quiet dignity of countless others like him. Individuals whose trades may seem curious to us today, but who once shaped the daily rhythm of a great civilization. The fortune teller of Chang'an is one example of how an unusual job could shape a quiet but meaningful life. Yet history also offers us glimpses into occupations recorded more directly. Figures whose professions were preserved in anecdote, inscription, or poem. Let us turn now to another life, one tied not to divination, but to sound, the cricket keeper and seller. In the Song dynasty, particularly during the 10th and 11th centuries, the fascination with crickets reached an extraordinary height. It was not only the common folk who kept these small creatures in cages. Even the emperor himself, Huizong of Song, was said to delight in listening to their songs. In this culture of appreciation, there emerged men whose lives revolved entirely around these insects, catching them, breeding them, and selling them in delicate cages to eager customers. Imagine one such man, whose daily life followed the seasons. In late summer, when the fields ripened, he would set out with small nets and jars, walking through tall grasses at dawn. The air was heavy with dew, the silence broken by the faint trill of crickets hidden among the stalks. He would pause, listen carefully, and then move slowly toward the sound. With practiced movements, he would trap the cricket, gently placing it in a small container, careful not to harm its fragile wings. Each insect represented not just a capture, but a potential source of livelihood. Once home, his work did not end. He tended the crickets with care, feeding them bits of greens or grains, ensuring their cages were clean and dry. The cages themselves were often crafted from gourds, bamboo, or clay, sometimes decorated with simple patterns. A good cage was nearly as important as the cricket itself, for it preserved the sound and gave the owner something to display proudly. Our seller thus often doubled as a cage maker, carving, smoothing, and shaping his wares by lamplight. In the marketplace, his stall was small, but it drew steady interest. Children would gather, listening for the soft chirps. Scholars, seeking moments of calm in their studies, purchased crickets for their steady song. Even wealthy officials might stop, looking for particularly lively specimens. The seller knew his clients well. To some, he recommended singers, crickets with long, melodious trills. To others, he sold fighters, more vigorous insects whose matches provided a curious form of entertainment. This trade, unusual to us today, was seen then as a blend of art and amusement. To keep a cricket was not to own a mere insect, but to hold a piece of nature's rhythm within a small cage. For scholars, the cricket's song symbolized the fleeting beauty of life. For common folk, it was a companion, a sound in the night that echoed through their modest homes. Yet the life of a cricket seller was not without hardship. Crickets lived short lives, and each season he had to begin again, catching, raising, and selling. A poor season could mean fewer crickets, fewer sales, and little food for his family. Still, he returned each year to the fields, listening in a half-light for the sound that promised both livelihood and wonder. It is said that poems of the song Dynasty often mention cricket sellers, noting their presence in markets, their soft calls to customers, their humble but steady trade. These fragments of literature remind us that though the seller himself may be forgotten, his occupation was so woven into daily life that it became part of cultural memory. As night fell, we can imagine him sitting by the small cages, listening to the chorus of chirping, the sound blending with the night breeze through bamboo shutters. For him, it was both business and comfort, both work and companionship. His profession, though unusual, reflected something deeply human, the desire to find music in the smallest corners of existence and to share it with others. Thus, the cricket seller's biography is not merely his own. It represents a countless number of anonymous men who lived by their ears, their patience, and their devotion to these small, singing creatures. They remind us that even the humblest trade can echo across centuries, preserved not in names but in sound, in culture, and in the quiet rhythm of ordinary life. From the cricket seller of the song Dynasty, let us drift toward another profession, one perhaps even stranger to modern ears, yet vividly recorded in the long annals of China's urban history. This was the role of the night soil collector, a humble but essential occupation that persisted for centuries. In a world without modern sanitation, the collection and transport of waste was as necessary as it was unpleasant. Yet in ancient Chinese cities, particularly during the Tang and Song dynasties, this work provided livelihoods to many. The men who performed it were often unseen in daylight. They moved instead at dawn or dusk, carrying buckets suspended on poles across their shoulders, stepping carefully through alleys and narrow streets. Imagine one such worker living near the edges of a bustling market town. His day began when others were preparing to sleep. With a wooden pole balanced on his back and two heavy buckets hanging from either side, he would walk toward the clustered homes. Families left waste in clay jars or wooden containers outside, and the collector's task was to empty them, carefully transferring the contents into his buckets. The air was thick with odors, but he had grown accustomed to it. To him, it was simply work. Once his load was gathered, he would carry it out of the city walls, toward fields waiting in the distance. There, the waste became something of value, spread across the soil to fertilize crops. This exchange, unpleasant in its immediate form but vital to the cycle of food, tied the hidden work of the collector directly to the bread and rice of every table. His clothing was plain, often worn and stained. His tools were simple: buckets, poles, and occasionally a small shovel or ladle. Yet his work was deeply woven into the rhythm of urban life. Records show that cities even taxed or regulated this profession, ensuring that the streets remained clean and the fields were nourished. Without him, both city and countryside would have suffered. Socially, however, the night soil collector often stood low on the scale of respectability. He was necessary, but rarely celebrated. Some households looked away when he passed. Others held cloths to their noses. Yet there were also those who greeted him kindly, for they understood that his labor supported not only their households, but the entire community. In certain accounts, night soil collectors worked in small teams. Two men might share the burden of lifting and emptying the heavy buckets. Sometimes they sang work songs together, simple tunes to mark time and make the labor more bearable. The rhythm of footsteps, the creak of poles, and the occasional chant became the soundtrack of their nights. We may pause here and notice how such a profession, though humble, connects to larger ideas of balance in society. It reminds us that civilizations are built not only on the grand achievements of emperors and architects, but also on the steady work of ordinary people who ensured the simplest needs were met. For the collector himself, life was modest. His home was small, his meals plain: rice, vegetables, perhaps fish when he could afford it. Yet his work guaranteed a form of stability. Farmers relied on him, markets depended on him, and though the records rarely mention his name, his footsteps were part of the daily cycle that allowed ancient Chinese cities to thrive. It is easy to imagine him, late at night, setting down his buckets after a long journey, washing his hands in a stream, and sitting quietly on a wooden stool outside his door. The city behind him glowed faintly with lanterns, while in the distance, crickets sang in the fields he had just fertilized. His work was done, invisible yet essential, unglamorous yet deeply tied to life itself. In telling his story, we are reminded that history is not only the record of triumphs and art, but also of labor that vanished without inscription. The night soil collector may not have left monuments or scrolls behind, but his unseen steps formed a foundation upon which the daily world of ancient China rested. As we leave behind the lives of individual workers, let us wander into a quieter, more enigmatic realm, the world of cultural curiosities and archaeological mysteries in ancient China. Here, our journey slows further, inviting you to imagine not only what people did, but also what traces of their lives they left behind, and what these traces tell us centuries later. Consider the ancient burial sites of unusual craftsmen. Archaeologists have uncovered tombs where the dead were interred not with gold or jade alone, but with tools of their trade. Brushes, bamboo slips, miniature cages, or small woven mats sometimes appear among the offerings. These artifacts suggest a profound belief that the skills and daily labor of life were to accompany a person into the next world. Imagine a craftsman of long ago carefully packing his miniature loom into a small coffin, so that even in the afterlife, his weaving could continue. The quiet care with which these objects were placed evokes a tenderness that time has not erased. Some tombs reveal even stranger occupations, preserved in miniature figurines. These Mingqi, clay models of workers and servants, were carefully sculpted, sometimes in sets, depicting scenes of daily life. Soldiers, dancers, cooks, and musicians stand frozen in clay, arranged around the tomb as if waiting to serve the deceased. Among them, unusual trades occasionally appear: a man grinding pigments, a woman carrying baskets of vegetables, or a peddler tending small animals. Their poses are precise, their expressions calm, suggesting both respect and careful observation. Beyond burial sites, there are texts and manuals detailing work considered unusual or highly specialized. Some are illustrated, others written in meticulous script. One such example is a manual describing the care and training of crickets for song and sport. It provides instructions on feeding, temperature control, and cage arrangement. Another explains the preparation of paper effigies, from folding techniques to painting rituals. These records are often dense, methodical, and quietly meticulous, perfect for the gentle exploration of history we are undertaking tonight. Artifacts themselves offer another layer of wonder. Excavations have uncovered ornamental tools for ritual use, delicate brushes with inscriptions, or small wooden boxes meant to store tokens of craft. The objects are humble yet precise, crafted with patience and skill. They speak to a world that valued quiet mastery, careful observation, and the rhythms of ordinary labor. Imagine holding one of these items, running your fingers over the smooth edges, feeling the faint grooves carved centuries ago, and sensing the hands that once held it. Even the architecture of workshops and marketplaces offers subtle mysteries. In some towns, layouts were designed not merely for efficiency, but to enhance acoustics, light, or airflow. Courtyards for storytellers or musicians were arranged so that sound carried evenly, while spaces for fermenting tofu or drying herbs were positioned to catch breezes and sunlight. These choices were practical, yet thoughtful, revealing a society attuned to both work and comfort. And then there is the puzzle of ancient urban sanitation, the very work of night soil collectors. Archaeologists examining old city drains and waste channels noticed the precision and forethought embedded in these systems. They were designed to minimize disease and odor, yet they also reveal something remarkable, an understanding of balance between urban life and human labor. The traces of such infrastructure silently testify to the lives of those who built and maintained them, largely forgotten, yet indispensable. To observe these artifacts, tombs, and manuals is to enter a quieter dialogue across time. We do not see the faces of workers, nor hear their voices directly, but we sense their presence in the objects left behind. Each small tool, figurine, or manual is a whisper from the past, a story of labor, care, and rhythm that survived centuries of silence. Imagine yourself slowly walking through an excavation site. Dust motes float in shafts of sunlight. Broken pottery and clay figurines litter the ground, and the faint smell of old earth fills the air. Every object invites contemplation. Every miniature tool reminds us of lives that were ordinary yet essential. These discoveries carry the same calming rhythm as the daily occupations we explored earlier, but now with a layer of mystery, the quiet thrill of uncovering what was long hidden. Here, in these echoes of culture and labor, we find a gentleness that historians rarely acknowledge, the quiet dignity of ordinary work, preserved carefully for the ages, leaving only subtle clues for us to piece together. In exploring these mysteries, we not only learn about ancient professions, but also feel the soft heartbeat of a society long past, steady, rhythmic, and strangely comforting. From excavation sites and Ming-Chi figurines, let us drift toward another quiet wonder of ancient China, the preservation of unusual cultural practices through art and ritual. These practices, often mundane yet deeply symbolic, offer a subtle glimpse into how ordinary life intertwined with belief, creativity, and imagination. Consider, for instance, the ritual of paper effigies. Artisans crafted delicate paper servants, animals, and miniature houses intended for the afterlife. Unlike grand monuments or jade burial items, these offerings were ephemeral. They were created to be burned, disappearing in smoke, yet their creation required meticulous care. Imagine a quiet room, soft light filtering through paper windows, the faint scent of ink and glue lingering in the air. The artisan folds and paints each figure with gentle precision, aware that this small gesture carries significance beyond the tangible, an act of care for those who have passed. Similarly, ancient texts describe musical rituals performed to mark seasons or honor ancestors. These were not dramatic ceremonies, but measured, careful observances. Musicians played small flutes, drums, or stringed instruments, sometimes in courtyards or temple spaces designed for optimal acoustics. The notes were deliberate, rising and falling in slow, soothing patterns. It was both practical and spiritual. The music accompanied ritual, facilitated reflection, and wove daily life with the intangible rhythm of belief. Archaeologists also uncover tools that hint at unusual hobbies or trades. Small brush sets for calligraphy or painting, miniature looms for weaving practice, and intricately carved bamboo slips for storytelling illustrate a culture that valued precision, repetition, and quiet mastery. Each artifact is more than a tool. It is evidence of patience and routine, of hours spent in gentle, meticulous labor. Imagine holding one of these items, running your fingers along the grooves, sensing the slow, meditative process of its use centuries ago. Some mysteries are subtler, embedded in urban layouts and architecture. Ancient towns often incorporated spaces for specialized activities, courtyards for musicians and storytellers, narrow alleys for peddlers and vendors, and secluded corners for quiet artisans. The placement of sunlight, airflow, and sound was intentional, reflecting a society attuned to both efficiency and comfort. The town itself, with its careful planning, becomes a silent testament to daily life, preserving traces of work and ritual even as centuries pass. And then there are the enigmatic inscriptions occasionally discovered in tombs or on artifacts. A small carved character, a faintly painted symbol, or a simple pattern may hint at a profession, a ritual, or a personal story. Scholars speculate endlessly. Was this a mark of ownership, a signature, or a symbol of spiritual significance? For us, these traces invite imagination. The mystery is not frightening. It is contemplative, drawing attention to the lives and thoughts of people otherwise lost to time. Even the practice of keeping crickets, a favorite pastime of Song Dynasty households, leaves subtle clues in texts and cages. The meticulous care, the choice of cages, and the recording of songs reflect a society that valued quiet observation, patience, and rhythm. Scholars note that listening to crickets was associated with calm reflection, aligning perfectly with the soothing tone of our exploration. Imagine a small courtyard at dusk, a gentle breeze, and a faint chorus of crickets, the music of a society attentive to tiny, overlooked details. Taken together, these discoveries, the effigies, musical rituals, miniature tools, architectural arrangements, and textual clues, reveal a world in which even unusual or seemingly trivial labor had meaning. Life was organized, measured, and deeply connected to the flow of daily existence. The work of artisans, the care of musicians, the repetition of crafts, all these contributed to a rhythm that was gentle, predictable, and comforting. Picture yourself walking slowly through an ancient workshop or courtyard. Dust floats lightly in sunlight. Miniature figures rest carefully on shelves, and the faint hum of musical instruments seems almost audible in the mind. Each artifact, each arrangement, each trace is a whisper from the past, inviting contemplation rather than excitement. In this way, history becomes a soft companion, a guide through quiet labor, creative effort, and the subtle mysteries of human life. As you linger in this imagined world, notice how even the most unusual occupations were tied to rhythm, patience, and the gentle passage of time. The traces left behind remind us that history is not only grand battles or empires, but also the careful, repeated, and sometimes peculiar work of countless individuals who shaped the texture of daily life. From workshops and courtyards, let us drift to the curious intersection of ritual, craft, and daily life. the quieter mysteries that give us glimpses into both the ordinary and the extraordinary. Here, the work of unusual trades merges with culture and belief, leaving traces that are subtle yet enduring. One example comes from the ancient tea masters who carefully cultivated the art of tea preparation. Tea was more than a drink. It was a ritual. Specialists measured leaves, heated water precisely, and poured in measured strokes. The process was deliberate, almost meditative. Merchants, officials, and common folk alike would gather, observing or participating. The tools, ceramic bowls, bamboo whisks, and patterned cloths, were arranged meticulously. Archaeologists uncover these implements centuries later, often perfectly preserved, revealing a society attentive to detail, rhythm, and aesthetics. The practice, though ordinary, had an elegance that echoed the values of careful labor and mindfulness. Similarly, miniature cooking figurines and models found in tombs suggest that culinary trades were both practical and ceremonial. Artisans created clay depictions of chefs at work, grinding spices, shaping dumplings, or stirring pots. These models were not meant to be eaten from. They were symbolic, representing sustenance and the continuity of domestic life. They remind us that even mundane labor, cooking, cleaning, feeding a family, was seen as worthy of preservation and commemoration. Imagine holding one of these tiny figures, observing the care in each detail, the precise folds of a chef's garment or the texture of a clay pot. Beyond objects, certain spaces in ancient towns preserved ritualized labor through architecture. Courtyards for weaving, rooms for calligraphy, gardens for quiet reflection, each designed not only for function, but also for harmony with natural light, airflow, and acoustics. The spatial arrangement of daily work was intentional, allowing artisans to practice their trades with focus while minimizing fatigue or disruption. In this way, the physical layout itself becomes a subtle record of culture, whispering the values of patience, order, and quiet productivity. Archaeologists also note the traces of ephemeral art, such as lanterns, ceremonial banners, and decorative papers. Though fragile and long decayed, traces of pigments on old manuscripts or wooden frames hint at artistry that was vibrant yet unobtrusive. These items were designed for ritual or celebration, yet their function was gentle, to mark a season, to honor ancestors, to provide a rhythm to the year. Even as they faded, they carried meaning, demonstrating that culture and craft could coexist without spectacle, offering calm continuity rather than excitement. Then there were musical instruction manuals and records of small instruments. Flutes, stringed instruments, and percussion tools were cataloged with care. Instructions were often meticulous, noting posture, finger positions, and timing. Music was intended not for grandeur, but for accompaniment, meditation, and subtle entertainment. Imagine a scholar or artisan following these instructions in a quiet room, the soft tones drifting through a courtyard, harmonizing with the rustle of leaves or the chirp of crickets. Such soundscapes created a rhythm to life, an understated orchestration that underscored daily labor and ritual. Even minor trades, previously mentioned in our earlier segments, leave clues in these artifacts. Miniature cages for crickets, tiny looms, small baskets, all reveal the meticulous care with which ordinary work was documented, observed, or ritualized. From funerary objects to manuals, from architectural layouts to ceremonial decorations, the material traces highlight a theme consistent across centuries: attention to detail, measured labor, and the quiet persistence of daily rhythm. As night deepens in your imagination, picture walking through an ancient courtyard at dusk. The air is cool and fragrant with flowers or drying herbs. Tiny clay figurines rest in a line. Delicate tools lie nearby, and the faint sound of a bamboo flute drifts from a corner. Shadows lengthen over the paving stones, and light glimmers softly across worn surfaces. Every object, every trace of craft, seems to whisper stories of patience, care, and continuity. Through these mysteries and archaeological fragments, we realize that unusual professions were never isolated curiosities. They were intertwined with culture, belief, and daily life. The work of artisans, musicians, cooks, and ritual specialists forms a subtle symphony of human activity, gentle in its rhythm, reassuring in its repetition. Here, amid the whispers of objects long past, the heartbeat of history is soft, steady, and profoundly comforting. Having explored the quiet rhythms of ordinary laborers, unusual trades, and the mysteries preserved in archaeology, let us now turn our attention to a world of contrast: the lives of the social elite in ancient China. Here, the rhythm is different, not in speed, but in focus, delicacy, and ritual. By observing the upper classes, we see not only wealth and privilege, but also how daily life, in its structured form, mirrored many of the principles we encountered among craftsmen and street workers. Consider a Tang Dynasty scholar official, a man whose days were regimented by both personal discipline and societal expectation. He rises early, often before dawn, in a residence carefully arranged with courtyards, study rooms, and libraries. The scent of incense drifts faintly through the air, mingling with the aroma of warm tea, freshly brewed from leaves measured with precision. The scholar's morning is devoted to study, reviewing classic texts, composing poetry, and practicing calligraphy. His brush glides across paper with deliberate strokes, the rhythm of his hand echoing the measured pulse of his mind. Meals in an elite household are equally ritualized. A servant might present rice, vegetables, and small portions of fish or meat on carved lacquer trays. Each item is arranged with aesthetic balance, reflecting harmony and order. The scholar or official eats slowly, savoring flavors and textures, observing etiquette, and allowing the act of nourishment to become almost meditative. Even in indulgence, there is restraint, a careful adherence to cultural ideals of moderation and refinement. In contrast to common laborers who relied on physical endurance, the elite depended on mental cultivation and social skill. A court official might spend hours writing reports, practicing poetry, or engaging in debate with colleagues. Public banquets, calligraphy gatherings, or music performances provided both entertainment and social education. Yet the pace remained unhurried. Despite the apparent abundance, there was a meticulous order, a patterning of activity designed to cultivate poise, reflection, and societal harmony. An unusual profession within the elite is that of the imperial librarian or archivist. These individuals manage the collection, preservation, and cataloging of scrolls, books, and official records. Their work required precision, patience, and extraordinary care. Shelves of texts were organized by topic, dynasty, and author. Each scroll was handled with gloves, stored in dry chambers, and checked regularly for decay. Their labor ensured that knowledge, history, and culture endured beyond the lives of individual rulers or scholars. Even leisure activities among the elite mirrored careful planning and attention to detail. Consider the gardens of wealthy households. They were designed not merely for beauty, but for reflection, study, and seasonal observance. Ponds were placed to reflect sunlight and shadow, rock formations arranged for symbolic meaning, and pavilions positioned to catch breezes. Walking slowly through these gardens, one could meditate, compose poetry, or simply observe the subtle movements of birds and insects. The rhythm of life here, though vastly different in material circumstance, echoes the attention to routine, patience, and observation that we saw in ordinary laborers and craftsmen. Of course, contrast is not only in luxury, but also in labor. While scholars and officials enjoyed education and refined surroundings, their households were maintained by teams of servants, cooks, and attendants. Each task, lighting lanterns, drawing water, preparing meals, was executed with care and order, forming a silent, essential rhythm. The lives of elite citizens depended on the quiet labor of others, linking the worlds of privilege and toil in a subtle, almost invisible network. Imagine yourself entering a grand courtyard at dawn. The air is cool, fragrant with flowers and incense. Lanterns sway gently in the breeze. A scholar moves among courtyards and study rooms, scroll in hand, brush poised for writing. Servants arrange items with precision, the sound of water in small ponds blending with birdsong. Every motion is measured, yet soft, creating a calm harmony. This is life at the top, a world shaped by order, care, and cultural refinement, as quietly structured as the daily routines of workers we observed earlier. By examining the elite, we see that unusual professions and daily labor are mirrored in miniature. Every role, whether grand or modest, carries a rhythm. The scholar's brushstroke, the servant's careful step, the archivist's meticulous cataloging. These are echoes of a larger principle, a cultural insistence on structure, care, and continuity. Even in privilege, life was composed, deliberate, and attentive to detail, a calming lesson from centuries past. From the scholar officials and librarians, let us move to another dimension of elite life. The domestic specialists and artisans who serve them, whose work, though less visible, was critical to the smooth rhythm of high-status households. While a scholar's morning may be deliberate and calm, the execution of that calm depends on unseen hands, organized labor, and precise routines. In the large courtyard homes of the Tang and Song dynasties, cooks were particularly vital. They did not merely prepare meals, they curated experiences. Ingredients were carefully selected, rice polished, vegetables trimmed, fish cleaned and sliced. Seasoning was subtle and deliberate, each element harmonized to complement the others. The cook's day began before sunrise, with the sound of water drawn from wells and the faint clatter of wooden tools. Fire was tended with vigilance, and pots were stirred with quiet attention. For the elite, each meal became a ritual of calm, reflecting taste, health, and aesthetics simultaneously. Similarly, servants responsible for clothing and textiles performed their duties with measured precision. Robes, sashes, and ceremonial garments were folded meticulously. Silk and brocade were polished, repaired, or replaced. Small attendants handled embroidery, ensuring threads remained straight and patterns unbroken. These daily routines, though unseen by most, created a seamless environment where elegance and function coexisted. Without such care, the scholar or official's life would be disordered and distracted. Yet through the labor of others, every movement in the household felt deliberate and composed. Beyond domestic life, certain unusual trades specialized in refined pastimes. Artisans prepared ink, brushes, and pigments for painting and calligraphy. Gardeners cultivated bonsai, carefully trimming branches and arranging rocks to reflect aesthetic principles. Music instructors guided apprentices in delicate instruments like the guqin or shao flute, teaching slow, deliberate movements to produce soft, resonant tones. Every action reinforced rhythm, patience, and attentiveness, turning ordinary leisure into subtle artistry. Even sanitation was managed thoughtfully. While ordinary workers managed waste in cities, elite households employed attendants to ensure private spaces remained clean and orderly. Small courtyard channels, carefully swept floors, and water drawn for bathing all contributed to a sense of tranquility. The rhythm of these routines mirrored that of larger urban systems, though scaled down to the intimacy of the home. The daily life of the elite, therefore, is a study in contrasts. On one hand, wealth provided comfort, refined surroundings, and access to education, art, and literature. On the other, it demanded careful maintenance, a network of skilled labor, and attention to minutiae. Luxury and discipline were intertwined. The quiet diligence of cooks, attendants, gardeners, and musicians created a harmonious environment in which intellectual and creative pursuits could flourish. Imagine, then, a day in such a household. Morning light filters through carved wooden screens, illuminating carefully arranged scrolls and delicate ceramics. A gardener moves slowly, trimming a bonsai, while musician tests a stringed instrument for pitch. The cook stirs a pot, the scent of simmering rice blending with the aroma of incense. Servants arranged trays of tea and cloths for the scholar's study. Even minor gestures, the placement of a brush, the folding of a sleeve, carry intention. Every element contributes to a slow, continuous rhythm, echoing the measured labor of artisans and workers outside the walls. It is in these moments that the contrast becomes a form of reflection. The elite life may appear distant or luxurious, yet it mirrors the principles of diligence, patience, and repetition that we observed in ordinary trades. The difference lies in scale and circumstance, not in the underlying rhythm of labor. Both worlds, the marketplace and the courtyard, the workshop and the study, share the same quiet insistence on care and order. As dusk falls, the household prepares for evening rituals. Lanterns are lit, incense burned, and instruments tuned for soft practice. Meals are finished, floors swept, and garments arranged for the night. The pace slows, shadows lengthen across courtyards, and the air cools. In this structured calm, the lives of the elite echo the subtle, measured tempo of the city beyond, the quiet heartbeat of history, orderly, deliberate, and profoundly soothing. As we continue through the lives of the social elite, let us pause to consider the interplay between leisure, art, and the subtle routines that shaped each day. Unlike ordinary laborers, whose work was tangible and immediate, the elite invested time in refinement, in practices that were both aesthetic and meditative, revealing a different rhythm of existence. One such pastime was scholarly writing and poetry composition. A scholar might spend hours seated on a low wooden stool, a brush poised over paper, composing verse inspired by the seasons, the architecture of the garden, or the gentle murmur of water flowing in a courtyard pond. The act of writing was slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic. Each character was formed carefully, the ink flowing in measured strokes. Observing this, one is reminded that even leisurely pursuits demanded discipline and attentiveness, a soft echo of the careful labor of artisans and servants. Tea culture, too, provided both pleasure and calm. Preparing tea was an art form in itself. The selection of leaves, the precision of water temperature, and the rhythm of pouring were all deliberate. Tea ceremonies were not hurried. They unfolded gradually, creating a space for reflection and gentle interaction. Imagine the subtle scent of tea leaves rising from a bowl, the warmth of the liquid in one's hands, and the quiet conversation that accompanies such moments, a serene counterpoint to the bustle of city streets outside the residence walls. Music remained an important part of elite life, often intertwined with education and social connection. Courtyards or small pavilions serve as practice spaces for delicate instruments like the guqin or shao. Notes were drawn slowly, deliberately, with pauses that allowed reflection. Students and teachers moved with care, ensuring each pluck, each breath contributed to a soft harmony. This practice, like all others in the household, was measured, patient, and calming. Art and craftsmanship were equally valued. Skilled artisans produced items for display or daily use, from intricately carved lacquer trays to delicate ceramics and painted scrolls. Attention to detail was meticulous. Lines were straight, pigments even, and shapes harmonious. The objects themselves created an environment of tranquility, reinforcing the rhythm of life within the elite household. Every brushstroke, every carved pattern was part of a wider tapestry of calm order. Even leisure activities like board games or storytelling were guided by a sense of decorum and measured engagement. Games were not hurried or competitive. They emphasized observation, patience, and social interaction. Storytelling was performed softly, in careful cadence, drawing listeners in without overwhelming them, much like the narratives we now share about ordinary laborers and unusual trades. Yet for all its refinement, elite life remained dependent on labor. Servants prepared meals, managed clothing, swept floors, and tended gardens. Musicians practiced for their patrons. Couriers delivered messages. Every gentle rhythm of the household relied on a web of careful work, echoing the diligence of craftsmen and traders outside the walls. In this way, Privilege was inseparable from structured labor. The calm and order of elite life existed because countless others maintained it. As evening falls, the courtyard transforms. Lanterns glow softly, their light reflected in ponds and polished tiles. Incense drifts in the air, mingling with the scent of evening flowers. Music, faint and deliberate, mingles with the distant chorus of crickets. Scrolls are rolled and stored, brushes cleaned, garments arranged for the night. The scholar and his household move with quiet precision, each action measured, each gesture part of a rhythm that has endured through centuries of observation and preservation. By witnessing these final glimpses into elite daily life, we can appreciate a universal principle. Whether in the bustling market, the quiet workshop, or the serene courtyard, human existence is shaped by repetition, care, and attention. Each profession, whether humble or elevated, unusual or refined, contributes to the subtle symphony of life. The elite may enjoy abundance, but their tranquility, like that of the ordinary worker, arises from structure, patience, and deliberate action. And so, as our journey through ancient China draws to a close, we find ourselves returning to the quiet rhythms of life, both ordinary and extraordinary, humble and refined. From the bustling streets where unusual trades flourished, to the careful hands of artisans, the soft melodies of musicians, and the meditative routines of scholars, each fragment of history reveals a delicate, measured pulse that echoes through time. Imagine the marketplace once more, the scent of herbs and spices lingering in narrow alleys, vendors arranging wares with care, crickets singing softly in cages under lantern light. Hear the distant footfalls of collectors carrying their burdens through quiet streets, and imagine the gentle rustle of clothing as servants tend to the courtyards of the elite. Each sound, each action, is part of a rhythm both comforting and enduring, a subtle music of life that has survived centuries in fragments of clay, ink, and memory. Think of the tombs and Ming-Chi figurines, the tiny tools and painted effigies left behind. They whisper stories of diligence, patience, and the quiet artistry of daily existence. Through them, we glimpse the persistence of human effort, the way even the most modest professions left traces of care and thoughtfulness. Even the elite, in their courtyards and study rooms, lived within the same principle. Every gesture, every moment, carefully composed, deliberate, and reflective. History, as we have discovered together, is not only a record of grand events or monumental figures. It is the accumulation of countless small actions, measured steps, and thoughtful rituals. Whether a scholar polishing a brush, a cook stirring a pot, a musician drawing a soft note, or a craftsman folding delicate paper, these acts form a tapestry of calm continuity. They remind us that life, in all its forms, has always depended on patience, attention, and gentle rhythm. As you settle into your own space, perhaps lying quietly in bed or sitting in soft lamplight, take a moment to feel the echoes of these past lives. Let the gentle cadence of daily labor, ritual, and art soothe your thoughts. Reflect on the subtle harmony that existed across centuries, connecting streets and courtyards, workshops and gardens, marketplaces and scholar studies. If this kind of storytelling brings you even a hint of peace, consider liking the video or subscribing, but only if it truly comforts you. I would also love to hear from you in the comments, where you're listening from, what time it is, and perhaps which story whispered to you most softly. There's a quiet joy in knowing that others, like you, are drifting alongside the same ancient rhythms, falling asleep to the gentle cadence of forgotten lives. So dim the lights. Allow your mind to wander through lantern-lit streets, quiet courtyards, and sunlit workshops. Let the whispers of history, the soft footsteps of artisans, and the faint melody of crickets carry you toward rest. Sleepy Historian bids you farewell for now, inviting you to drift gently into dreams, cradled by the unhurried, enduring pulse of human life across centuries. May your sleep be as steady, measured, and comforting as the lives we explored together tonight.